welcome back to another episode of What's on Your Mind. I'm your host, Nyemade, or that African butterfly, as I'm known on social media. Thank you for joining us for another great conversation this week. I have my guest with me, Marcus Thomas. Hi, Marcus. Thank you for joining me.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So, a little bit about Marcus. He is a Delaware native. He has built a career in commercial and residential property development with firms that covered New Jersey, Philadelphia, and Delaware. He now works with Christopher Alexander Holdings to help lead the charge in revitalizing the city where he grew up. He's helped to form strategic partnerships with the Wilmington Housing Authority and the Delaware Affordable Housing Group. Beyond those projects, he has also played a key part in advising city policy on how to address the affordable housing crisis. Taking it one step further, he has also written an ebook on financial literacy to help assist others who are looking to get out of debt. Basically, he is a wealth of knowledge. Well, if we have lots of things on our mind, he's the person to talk to. Thank you so much again for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me again.
Was there anything in there that I left out that you want to share with the viewers?
No, I honestly want to go back and listen to that so I can write that down because that was well done.
Perfect. Well, to start off with, what inspired your journey to get into real estate development?
Good question. I think in order to give you that, I got to give you a little context, right? I actually was introduced to real estate by just pure luck, right? And actually, as I think back on my story, one of my first mentors, his name was Jim Brennan, and Jim Brennan was a well-known wealth of knowledge in the city of Wilmington and probably in the state of Delaware. And as a young person, I was always inquisitive. And I would always ask him a ton of questions as it relates to, what he does and, how he goes about, his day to day in the world of real estate, not knowing that what he was doing was planting a seed, right? And years later, when I graduated from college, I graduated with a degree in biology and psychology, right? Those two components, maybe psychology today, but biology has nothing to do with housing.
It's not really a strict trajectory to housing.
Yeah. When I got out of school, I worked in the juvenile population world for some time, right? Ended up transitioning from the juvenile world and working in the substance abuse inpatient treatment facility. And that's where I met the owner at that time, pulled me to the side and asked me a couple questions, right? He saw something in me that I did not see, right? I'm a young kid in my 20s, early 20s. And he simply asked me, he said, what do you want to do? Do you want to continue this path? If you do, you got to get a master's, right? Got to get a master's degree. Or he's like, have you ever thought about real estate? And I'm like, the only part of real estate that I thought about was the what you see on TV, people selling homes, right?
Yeah.
And more importantly, I never saw anybody that looked like me as a representation. So I just never really thought about it. And so he put a little fire under me, right? He was really ballsy. He said to me, well, I'm going to give you two options, right? First option is you go back and you get your master's. Get your master's, promotions, etc. And I stopped him and I said, come on, buddy, like, I understand a bit or two about what the master's is all about. And the increase that you're going to give me is not going to be substantial to the taxes and everything that's going to be taken into consideration. So I'm not interested in the master's. It's like, well, you take the ladder and go down the road of real estate. And I did not know at that time that he actually had a large portfolio of real estate and development. And he was a huge political figure. And so he said, I'll take you under the wing, for lack of better words. And he did. He taught me a few things, introduced me to the world of corporate real estate. And that's where my journey began. So I did not go and get my master's, right? I ended up leaving, right? Resigning from that role. And by act of faith and some luck, here we are.
And I think that that's huge. I'm a big faith believer. And I think that everything happens for a reason, when it's meant to, how it's meant to, and it seems like you were supposed to cross paths with that person, especially given that you didn't even know his background. It was just purely kismic, as they say.
Yeah. You know, when you're 20, what, 22, 23 years old, man, whew, trying to do something like that when you're just finishing school, you got to pay loans, you got to pay rent, you got, to take that kind of leap of faith. I look back at it like, man, you're insane.
Yeah, yeah. But that's usually you find those people who succeed for whatever term or phrase you want to use the word succeed, because it means something different to everyone, right? But a lot of those people who really stand out are the people who take those leaps, take those faiths, are able to sort of step out into the unknown. And especially since you mentioned something I thought was interesting, which is that when you thought of real estate, you thought of what we see on TV, real estate agents. And I think that that's so common for most people. We very rarely think of the commercial side and then the development side of it, because the houses have to be built somehow to be sold, and that's a huge market that people don't really think about. Did you do a little bit of research into that before saying yes, or were you just like yes to real estate?
My extent of due diligence at that time was just purely just asking family. Like, I have a great relationship with my mother, and I spoke with her, and she was like, "You're young, go take the risk," right? And
Mhm.
so, I said, "Okay, sounds good." And so through my journey, I learned a thing or two each chapter. Right, I didn't just jump into development. I worked the ladder of corporate, and then was introduced to a developer who then allowed me to learn a thing or two from him, from
Mm.
ground up to stabilization projects.
Okay, so you can't just go right into development.
I mean, you could. I can't speak for everyone, but for my story, I went a little different route.
Now, is that how you got connected with Christopher Alexander Holding, or was there another? Was that part of your journey towards Christopher Alexander?
Yeah, it's a family company, right? And so I'm a first, as I mentioned, first generation developer. The family company is actually consisted of my mother, right? My uncle, who is 30 plus years of working in the construction field, right?
Mhm.
I have my aunts. I have pretty much folks that I've known all my life to be part of our family company, right? And so how that transcended,
Yeah.
right, is through working through corporate and working with mom and pop developers. And then I just made a decision. I just said, I think it's time that, you know, we can do exactly the same thing that everyone else is doing. Um, and let's just take another leap of faith and start building out our company structure as we see fit.
And that is definitely a huge leap. Family business. I mean, they say that one people not to work with his family, but that's also some people's greatest success. And it sounds like it's been great success for you. And you guys are like a registered minority owned business, right?
We are.
Yeah. And that's awesome, because something else you mentioned was not seeing people who look like you. So having more people who look like you and having you be that person for others, I think is amazing. Can you share just a little bit about like the mission and vision behind Christopher Holding and how it's helping to address housing needs in the community?
Yeah. So Christopher Alexander Holdings is just to give a little bit of some context. Is it's a semi vertically integrated firm, and so what does that mean? Right. That's a company that works on the development aspect of things, also works on the management, the operations of things, and also project management and construction. Right. So we do a lot of things in house, but we also do things we outsource. Right. And so our main focus is to assist with workforce housing, right? That's really our main niche, right? And I like to use the word meaningful projects,
Mhm.
right? We don't just take on any project. We take on projects that we know are going to be impactful for the community, right? That does not necessarily mean that we don't shy away from market based apartment buildings or, fair market, well, not fair market, but new market, new constructions, right? But we really want to focusing on, workforce housing crisis that is happening, as you can see nationwide, but really, when we look at the landscape of Delaware in particular, there's a huge need for housing, especially in underserved areas, especially the community, like, communities that I grew up in.
Mhm. How does your company ensure the development needs of those underserved communities?
Such a great question. We take the time to really get a ton of data, right? And data is a combination of a few things. Talking with political figures, right? Asking them what's needed in the neighborhood, right? Meeting with associations, right? Even with our strategic partnerships, asking how can we be of assistance? How can we be a servant, right? And then, also working with the community. I think those things most people probably don't do. And because we do that, it allows our projects to be, um, to your question and to your point, that those things assist us in that.
So when we talk about, that research and how it's helped with those projects, which I think is wonderful, can you talk about maybe some key projects that you're currently working on and how and the impact that they're having on the current local housing market?
Yeah, I could tell you about our current project that we're working on right now. And I use the word meaningful a lot, so bear with me. But we're very, I'm very intentional, right, with some
Hmm.
things that I do. So this project in particular is located in the 5th District of Wilmington. It's actually in the Quaker Hill section. This building, I remember this building when I was about 7 years old, right? And I haven't been seven for a very, very long time, right? And so, fast forward, the building is about, it still has been blighted and vacant ever since. It's about 4,900 square feet, about 1,800 square feet per unit, and there's about 3 apartment buildings in the building. And so this project has assisted in so many different ways. Number one, the jobs that we've been able to create within the community, right? Not only that, you start to see when you start doing projects that are intentional, right? The community will follow. They might not follow as soon as you want them to, but we're seeing things that put a smile on our face when we see across the street. The current owner is taking the time out to now clean the front part of the house. When you see down the street someone starting to change their whole curb appeal, because they're starting to see the beautification of the neighborhood, right? And people start to take true ownership, um, start to take a lot more pride in their neighborhood.
Hmm. Which is definitely a great thing. Something, the whole purpose of the show, What's on Your Mind, is to talk about what's on our mental health, right? And people are like, housing, mental health, but that your housing, your financing, like if that's not in place, like what else are you even able to think about if you're worried about the roof over your head? So having affordable housing is so incredibly important. But I have to think, as far as like housing and development, like it sounds so expensive, right? Like when we think about building and doing all those things, like sounds, I just hear ka-ching, ka-ching, ka-ching. So what are some of the challenges that you face as a developer in making quality housing, but in a way that's affordable for communities?
Well, you gotta think about that word affordable, right? Like, I think there are two different words. You have affordable, and then you have workforce,
Mm.
right? Um, Affordability is really looked upon at the landscape of not what someone can typically afford. It's whatever the current jurisdiction or zip code allows, right? Workforce housing is really looked upon at whatever that area median income is, right? And it also takes into consideration a few other things that allows for a resident to get an apartment that they're able to afford and still have some means, right? I hope this is all gonna come full circle here, right? When it comes to development projects, you have something called sources and you have uses. Sources are what all the funding that you're going to be using.
Mm-hmm.
Your uses are how you're going to use those funds. And what people don't realize is that the states or your local city, they do have funding available for certain projects that are related to workforce or affordable housing. So how do you make a project feasible? That's really when you want to lock arms with, some of these administrations or, um, nonprofit organizations that are really going to lock in with you on your mission and that will help you reduce your cost for your overall build, right? Don't get me wrong, yes, real estate is one of the asset classes that does require a lot more capital, right? It is definitely capital sensitive. But at the same time, as I made mention, if you take the time necessary to find out the different fundings that's available, it can help you with your projects.
And that is always funding from without, helping to fund projects and make things better is definitely helpful, but it can also be stressful because sometimes you have the guidelines that they have for you to follow and things that you have to do to sort of make it meet on both sides of things. So, like, how do you approach working with your local government and communities to address these shortages and maybe address some needs like sustainability and things being energy efficient? How do you find that partnership?
Do we have longer than an hour to talk? Because this is that's an everyday battle.
Mm,
All right. You got to realize everyone has agendas, right? Everyone has certain certain initiatives that they have to spearhead, right? The only thing you can do is be consistent, right? With consistency, that opens the door for conversations that could propel you in the way that you see fit, right? Meaning like helping with some of the initiatives that you were mentioning, right?
mhm.
Um, you have to be willing to engage. Most people ask me what it is to be, in the development seat, and I say, you have to be pretty much some extent a politician, right? Like you have to be willing to just get yourself out there, have conversations with various different people, right? And then along your journey, you will find people that align with your mission, and it will help because they believe in what you're doing is going to be for the better good of a city or in a community.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And something, when we talk about bettering the city and the community and affordability and just the general overall improvement of the areas, sometimes we get into an area that sometimes is a little triggering for people, which is the word gentrification, right? People are like, where's that line between making it better and changing it to be something different than what it was? So can you sort of talk a little bit about like the impact of gentrification and how you ensure that your projects are benefiting the residents long term in a way that's improving the area, not harming them?
Yeah. Well, here's what I like where I like to start at. I read a book many years ago that I strongly recommend every one of your viewers to read. It's called The Color of Law by Rolf Rothstein. And he goes into detail and he talks about how many years ago, right, during the 60s and 50s, right, policies were created to pigeonhole, Black Americans, right? Most people don't really understand that some of those same policies have residual effects of what we're seeing today in some of these transitional neighborhoods. I ask people all the time, do you know why 95 was created? Most people don't know the answer, right? Most people say, well, 95 was created to allow me to get back and forth to where I need to be at quickly. Yes. But it was also created at a time period where, the suburbs was created, and it was a way to allow folks to bypass metropolitans to get quicker to the suburbs, which then had effects on the businesses, right? The neighborhoods, and then you start to see certain things crumble, right? And then as we get into certain years, you start having the drug issues that took place, right? I'm going to land this plane.
You're good. You're good.
And so, how do you, through gentrification, try to keep people within the community? Education is everything. Right. I think so you have, when you're doing projects, you have to go through various different hearings, right? And sometimes you have hearings where you have to meet with the community. That is a time where you should be very transparent. You should be very honest, right? Not only that, you should be willing to meet with people, the community, to let them know what you're doing. So for example, one of the things that we like to do with our projects is we like for 55 cents on every dollar, right? And that number is going to be changing to 65 cents on every dollar. We're investing that into minority-based businesses, right? Mm-hmm. Or women-owned businesses. And those are our subcontractors, anyone that is helping us with their project. 65 cents of that is going to that, right? That's huge.
Yeah.
Right? Number two, we're really trying to focus on figuring out the challenge with for sale housing, right? Most people are not able to purchase a house, right? And let's just be very clear here. Buying your first house can change everything for you. Change your trajectory of wealth, right? It can change, so many different things, right? But unfortunately, due to where we are as a country and the job market, people are not able to purchase their first home.
Yeah.
So what we're trying to figure out right now is how are we able to get the state's involvement to help with something called subsidy, right? And how this would work is we would be able to build a house, right? New homes, new construction homes that usually sell for $300,000, $400,000, but we're able to sell them at a price that people in that neighborhood are able to afford. And then the gap in between, let's just say the house we're able to sell for $200,000, there's a gap of another $200,000. We would ask the state for subsidy to cover that additional $200,000. Because people think that, a developer makes a ton of money. Well, sure, there's a lot more risk involved, and it costs a lot more money to build. So it's not, a thing where you're trying to get extremely rich. No, it's because you're trying to cover cost, right? Mm-hmm. So we're able to sell the home for a substantial amount, or allow someone their first home, right? Allow them to start their wealth building. And then for us as a firm, it allows us to cover cost. And so to answer your question, that is one of the ways that we are trying to assist with keeping people within their community.
No, and that's great. And something that you mentioned was hearings for people to kind of come in and talk about the project. Now, I've worked with the YPs and civic engagement and a little bit with the Homes Committee trying to get people to do their parts and go to hearings. And it's rough out there. Like, do you find good engagement with your hearings? Are people coming out? Are they having those conversations with you?
Yes and no, right? Like, not everyone's going to be in favor of what you're doing. And I think what I've learned from that is the missing denominators is questions,
Mm.
You know, you talk about a journey, right? Talk about the story that I shared with you. For a part of me feels like the reason why I'm so even keel is because of working in the world of juvenile population for so long, working in a substance abuse facility, treatment facility for so long, right? Dealing with various different personalities, right? Seeing people when they're at their worst times, right? Um, so I feel like from a Malcolm Gladwell standpoint, I did 10,000 hours of like learning a skill set. And fast forward, it has assisted me in really, you know, working with the community, talking with the community. And even when people are not on the same page with me, you know, it's all right, you know, but I'm still here to help.
Mm. Which is great. And I know that it's wonderful having those people to look to and having those people who are able to provide some additional assistance. I think sometimes when people think about doing good and helping others, it almost feels like we live, because we are in such a capitalist society where you have to decide between, like, do I want to get paid and live well, or do I want to help others? Like, it's one or the other, but you definitely can do both. And I think that you're a great example of showing how through your work you can also still help. So what advice would you give aspiring real estate developers who want to create a positive change through housing?
Hmm. Um, Number one, always look at your risk, right? Always look at your projects from so many different angles before you start them, right? Um, it's not an overnight thing. It's a marathon, right? Um, and really be okay with letting people that are in your circle that are not on the same page with you, let them go.
Mm.
If this is what you want to do, right? Let them go. Because around through your journey, you will lock in with the right people if you stay in long enough, right? And once you find those people will always promote you in ways that you won't even know. There's many times where I'm in like, I rip the hair out, right? And then I make a phone call, and a good buddy of mine's like, hey, we can get these things fixed immediately, right? Because there's a common interest. Yeah.
And I had a question because we talked a little bit about your current project. How long are projects? Like when I think of, because it always seems like it takes forever, right? Like I think of construction, I'm like, they've been doing it forever, but I'm sure there's a time period for each housing. Like what's a typical length for a project?
You know, they vary, right? They so vary. And that's such a great question. That is such a good question. Most people, they see a building, they don't understand. And I don't want to say they, most people don't understand what the process is
Mm-hmm.
from idea to conception.
Yeah.
So, for example, this building right now that I was just talking about, uh, it's going on 3 years,
Mm-hmm.
right? 3 years meaning from the time of an engagement of, you know, letters of intents to going through negotiations, right? Then going through different variant stages because it's historical, going through historical societies, right? Then because of where it's located, meeting with the associations, right? And then you start construction, right? But then there's a loan involved. So you have to make sure your loan is in alignment with what your budget is. And then you also have anomalies that take place, weather, work, you know, bringing in the right subcontractors. Um, and so a project can be anywhere from, you know, 3 years to 5 years, right? Depending on how big the size of the project is, right?
Yeah.
So
It's interesting. And Manuel said, amazing questions. Thank you as well. And if anyone else has any questions, please let us know. I only have a couple more for you. So you mentioned the projects can go from 3 to 5 years, and you're currently working on one. Do you have any other projects? Are you like a one project at a time? Are you able to do multiple projects? Like, what is your 2025, 26?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm definitely not the one that wants to have my eggs in various different baskets. I like to just be focused on one thing,
Mm-hmm.
and then we can move on, right? And so in our pipeline, we have two for sale projects that we want to work on, right? That we are trying to spur up economic development in the city. We also have another project that's we're going to do a couple um, apartment complex, anywhere between 4 units to 8 units, right? And then we're also in our pipeline. We are in the beginning stages of working on a partnership agreement to help with some type of transitional living facility where, state of the art design of a home structure that allows folks to have their own individual kind of apartment, right, in their bedroom, but also giving the amenities and features that allow for a program to be successful.
And as this transition, when you say transition, because there's different types. Are you talking prison, mental health, disability, uh,
Just I like to just use
drug,
the healthcare in the healthcare.
healthcare in general? Yeah. Okay, I think that that's wonderful actually, and it's great that you're working with that. And then last thing, just looking ahead, what are your long-term goals for Christopher Alexander Holding? Like, how do you envision the company continuing to impact the housing and community development?
We want to be a nationwide company. Our goal is to duplicate what we're doing in Wilmington and also in other submarkets of Delaware, and really do the same thing when it relates to meaningful projects, right? And so locking arms with, local municipalities. So our main niche is something called public-private partnerships.
Mhm.
So we like to really focus with the local government, lock arms with them, and assist them with their, for lack of better words, problems, their challenges with housing. And that could be, doing new construction. That can be revitalizing, right? There's also something called asset management, right, and property management. So our company, works with does asset management and property management, right? And so one of the things that you'll find is in that world, most people don't understand how to deal with a tenant correctly, how to really follow leases, and really make sure that the asset can continue to keep growing, but the people in the neighborhood can continue to keep growing too.
Mhm.
And so we have figured that out. And so we working with various different cities to help them with those types of challenges coming on board and helping them with that.
Awesome. That's great. Well, I mean, I can't thank you enough for giving me some time to just tell us more about what you do. I think it's one of those things where it's a big world, right? And there's so many things and so much is made up of stuff. And I find that there's certain things that we're all like sort of trained to focus our eye on, but then there's so many little things around it that are actually big things once you take a look at it that you never really think. And then you're like, oh, wow, there's all these questions, all these things. And I think real estate development is definitely one of those areas. So thank you for telling us more about that. Charles said, awesome conversation. Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you also for the great things that your company is doing in just developing the city, finding out more about how you're using your funds to also help support minority businesses, women businesses. Like that's a big deal working with those types of contractors. So thank you for all that you do.
My pleasure.
And if anyone wants to get a hold of you or learn more about your business, learn more about you, how can they reach out to you?
Yeah, so you can reach us at, you can send me a direct email, mthomas@cahbm.com. And our website is www.cahbm.com.
Perfect.
And I'm also on Instagram at IamKing_10.
Great. Well, thank you so much again. And thank you everybody who joined at home. I hope you have a great evening and I'll be back next week at 7:30.
All righty.